Okay, welcome everyone to our inaugural Digital.Health Studio Series. I'm Risa Vatanka, co-founder and CEO of Digital.Health, and I'm joined here by the one and only Dr. Daniel Kraft, the founder and chair of Digital.Health and founder and chair of NextMed Health. At Digital.Health, we are on a mission to accelerate adoption of digital health technologies and usher in a new era of health. The studio series is designed so that you'll hear from clinicians and innovators and researchers, people with lived experience sharing how they have adopted digital health technologies, and these real world examples are meant to serve as a model for others to emulate so we can truly accelerate these transformative technologies. So, the format for the day is you're going to hear a couple of presentations, and then we'll have a moderated panel discussion, and we're going to leave time for questions at the end. So do use the Q&A to write your questions, and we'll be sure to address them toward the end of the webinar. So, Daniel, you are always traveling around the globe and giving keynote speeches and experiencing all these incredible technologies. So, perhaps you could kick us off with a little bit on what's new and what's next.
Thanks, Parisa. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. It's an exciting time to think about the future and help create it across health and medicine. Let's give a quick intro. Our theme today is a bit about digital twins meeting healthcare transformation at the sort of interface of digital and data. And I think as we're all experiencing now, things are accelerating, whether it's new forms of ChatGPT or new forms of omics. Everything is happening faster and faster, and we all in this community in Digital.Health and beyond have the opportunity to leverage that exponential, even as it accelerates, to sort of hopefully reimagine healthcare around the planet, to make it more digitally enabled, more intelligent, more connected, personalized, and ultimately more democratized and available, meeting each individual who and where they are. And to take us from where we are sort of now, intermittent, reactive, sick care that's sort of one size fits all based on physical settings, to a future that's more health focused, leveraging continuous data, the digital twin, that's more crowdsourcing in our knowledge, obviously enhanced by AI and aligned with our workflows and beyond. So lots of things are moving quickly. I don't need to tell you that. We have new tool sets from the digital world and digital therapeutics to new forms of computational modeling to personalized cancer vaccines on the go, and that's where we have the opportunity to rethink things. I mean, one example of things that are moving quickly, of course, personalized genomics. 10 years ago, $10,000 for a personal genome. Now, roughly $100, on the way to $10. We can leverage that in sort of pharmacogenomics and picking the right drug or potentially the right medical device. We can look at diseases and just understand them at the genetic and the molecular level instead of the sort of generic one-size-fits-all type 2 diabetes, for example. And of course, it's not just genomic information that's becoming more available. The proteome, the exposome, the sociome, the microbiome, all these new forms of information we can start to leverage. And what I think about in the sort of digital twin realm, this idea of sort of multimodal health, we can start to layer all these forms of information and make them much more applicable to the individual for prevention, diagnostics, or therapy, whether it's understanding proteomics and predicting diseases years in advance, or as we'll talk more about in medical device realm, or in imaging of the heart or other organs, to understand them at much more precise ways to develop new preventions, therapies, and diagnostics. And ultimately, I'm an oncologist, to think about applying that at the bedside or the website. And we'll hear from our partners for autonomy about how they can leverage that in the medical device realm to predict what's going to work and not work for individual patients and build the next generation of devices and other interventions. At Digital.Health, we're trying to make sense of this explosion of solutions and platforms. If you haven't checked out Digital.Health, that's the website. You can go and find now over 4,000 digital health companies and solutions and match them to what you're looking for, whether it might be a diagnostic solution, looking for things that apply to AFib, like the AliveCore device, or others. You can rate them, save them, prescribe them. So it's a whole new platform that we've been building that hopefully you can leverage as you look in your own personalized journeys in health and beyond for yourself, your patients, your institutions. So with that, I think the meta theme today is how do we take these new forms of data, turn them to actionable insights and information that we can use to apply to precision prevention, diagnostics, and therapy around the planet. And the digital twin and the ability to make sense of that going forward is a key component. So that's a quick framing. I'm really pleased to hand it over to my friend and colleague, Ami Bhatt, who's the Chief Innovation Officer for the American College of Cardiology. We were just together in Davos last week. Had some good fun and some great discussions on the future of health and medicine, and real pleased and honored to have Ami with us. Over to you.
Great. And Daniel, thanks for a wonderful start to the webinar this morning. And if folks want to hear more about what you're talking about, I think joining us at NextMed Health, right, this March.
Sure. NextMed Health is a platform that I've chaired now for 10 plus years. Used to be called Exponential Medicine. Go to nextmed.health, where we look at the super convergence of technologies and how we reimagine healthcare around the planet. I'll put a note in the chat. Thanks.
Perfect. I'm just going to bring Ami on.
As we say, AI is easy, AV is hard. And here comes Ami.
Fantastic.
All right. Amazing to have Dr. Ami Bhatt with us, the brilliant Chief Innovation Officer at the American College of Cardiology, and she wears many hats, even with the FDA, Digital Health Committee, and many, many more. So, Ami, take it away.
Thank you so much for having me. Give me one sec, and I will just set this up for us. How's that? Fantastic. Well, thank you for having me. We have about just 10 minutes to talk, and so I'm starting with my disclosures. The first is, Plato said necessity is the mother of invention. I often am heard saying desperation is the mother of adoption. It is a little bit the story of my life and career doing rare diseases in cardiology, then doing telemedicine when people didn't really think it was worthwhile. And it's a running conversation, and I'll explain why now. So what do I hope you remember from the next 10 minutes we spend together? The first is the knowledge dilemma. The volume of medical knowledge and data today demands the use of artificial intelligence if we want to treat humans to the full extent of science and humanity. There is a lot that we know in the world. There are very little ways we can get all that knowledge to our patients without the use of artificial intelligence. The second thing we'll talk about is why digital twins. And the main reason really boils down to the following. Trial and error on humans will someday be considered inhumane because we actually can create what you look like, what your family looks like, what your community looks like, what your population looks like. And we can then figure out what is the best thing for you rather than trying it directly on you yourself. And that's the direction we're moving in. We'll talk more about that in the panel. And then lastly, you can't not use the word DeepSeek between yesterday and today. So we'll talk a little bit about the foreshadowing of DeepSeek. And I'd love to hear from my colleagues when we are on our panel about how that affects digital twins. But really, lower compute power needs, lower data needs, lower cost is here. So if you read through the lines of the stock market, which is creating a lot of hullabaloo to the healthcare market, it's actually promising with infrastructure and guardrails, always needing that. AI is going to be more accessible soon. And I think that's really the takeaway we take from that. So let's talk about the knowledge dilemma. Lots of scientific complexity. When I started practicing, if you gave me a disease, there was one chapter about it in a book, and there were a couple things we knew from practice. Now there's more to know about any given disease than one can imagine. We have biologic and digital biomarkers. There are biomarkers for everything. And so what do those mean, and how do we put them together to predict disease? We have social determinants and drivers. We understand that biology inside the human body is not all that it affects your disease process, your morbidity, or your mortality. So we have to take in all of those social determinants and drivers. And then with those three things is the limits of the human brain. We can only gather so much information in a given period of time during which we have to make a life and death decision for a patient. So are there any data on this? Actually, in 1980, medical knowledge doubled every 7 years. That was a pretty rapid rate. In 2010, they did measurements. It took fewer than 75 days for global medical knowledge to double. We cannot calculate doubling time today. That's how fast medical knowledge is growing. Second thing, we know we have a knowledge issue or a knowledge dilemma where there is more knowledge than the brain can deal with. We talk about the use, therefore, of AI for that. Why specifically digital twins? We'll do an intro to digital twins before the panel, but I just want to address it up front. We'd like to decrease uncertainty. The more we can do with this data and know about you, your community, the procedure, a specific hospital setting, whatever it might be you're trying to answer, the more we know about it, the more we decrease uncertainty in healthcare and medicine. And that's really important for humans. The second is we like predicting the best possible input for the best outcome. In general, we all want that. But we know that intent and impact in the medical field is a long story. We intended to do this, and the impact of the drug was better, worse, indifferent. To be able to do some predictive work really helps us. And then I'll give you two specific examples that I really like. We're not modeling with a digital twin just the anatomy. That is one thing we can do. Just model the anatomy, just model the product. We're not just modeling the physiology either, but we can do that. We can take all the different parts and see how they work together. This is true for healthcare. It's actually true in digital twin for whatever industry you may actually be in. We can model at a system level. How do all these things interact? And then eventually at a larger or population level. The example I show you here, Johns Hopkins School of Medicine has been working on this for many years. It is not new. Although it doesn't look like it, this is actually a picture of the heart. Atrial fibrillation is one of the most common diseases we see in people over the age of 60. For those of you who don't know, it's an irregular heart rhythm. It can lead to stroke. It often requires you to be on a blood thinner. And it's a very frustrating disease. The quality of life goes down. And so it turns out that we can actually model what the anatomy of the heart looks like, model where these recurrent arrhythmia electrical paths and circuits happen, and then model, if I do this catheter procedure, will this adequately help this disease go away? And so these are the kind of very straightforward examples of what we can refer to as digital twins in the simplistic form that can really make a difference in practice today. I want to take a step out and show you something that we do at the American College of Cardiology where I work. This is another form in its advanced versions, but I'm just showing you this, of digital twinning. And what we do is we look at populations and places where we think about what is the social vulnerability or driver there? What is the disease process that is most prevalent there according to electronic health records? What are the risk factors that we're seeing and what do outcomes look like? And then we can best understand if there's a certain area, let's take, for example, with hypertension. In that area with hypertension, if it is a salt-driven hypertension issue, you are better off putting in a healthy corner store with healthy foods where you have the fast food place. But if it's a place where you have a different form of hypertension, you may be better off having a local clinic or partnership. So what do you need in an area? And these are the kind of things we can do at a population level when we start building very strong digital twins. I'll end with this so that we have enough time for our panel. DeepSeek. So for those who may not know, yesterday was a dramatic day the world over, especially for those who follow economics, but also those who follow tech. We all know that the ability to make AI faster, better, less expensive was going to come because that's what happens in tech and healthcare. And as Daniel just showed you, there are things that we couldn't do before, like the human genome, without significant time and cost, that you can do at $100 and maybe soon $10. It's true for a lot of what we do. DeepSeek is one of those signs. Less compute power. My daughter, I think these guys know this, my daughter's part of the Planet Protectors Club, and she reminds me that I can't use AI everywhere in healthcare, because every time she sees me talk, I keep saying use AI for healthcare, because she said we can't afford it. Sustainability does not allow for that compute power for her generation to survive, and she's right. So less compute power, really important. We need less data to do things, and it ends up costing less. And when we were in Davos, as Daniel mentioned, Jan LeCun, who is one of the AI scientists that's really well known, really talked about open source, democratizing, here's how I did something, feel free to build on what I did. And that being able to give us a chance to really do health equity, do the kind of population health work we're talking about, not just do really good AI for the top 10%. So I wanted to end with lay terms. There's a lot of words. I tend not to do that on slides. I did it today because you can get out your phones and you can screenshot it if you want. I will put it on LinkedIn as well. But the current large language models we're using, like ChatGPT, they rely on a type of machine analytics called supervised learning. And that is, let me give you so much data that you look at that, by the way, a human has confirmed is correct, and then you can learn from it. And so that's like showing a ton of chest x-rays with pneumonia until the machine learns pneumonia, right? DeepSeek uses something called reinforcement learning. So you can help get a treatment plan. What's the best thing for me to do next? How? By reacting with the environment based on past things. If I try this, this might happen. Oh, that happened. Let me alter it. Can I try this? That might happen. This goes back to the idea of testing some ideas to have better prior knowledge before we touch our patients. Learn what gives a positive or negative outcome. Will it be perfect? Not anytime soon. But you feed it an attention and intention, and it says, here's the impact, and then you can keep refining. That's kind of the magic of this. Why is it a big deal in terms of tech and money? It requires far less data. Our pure tech friends may call these tokens. Our finance friends say, how much is the cost per input or output token? At the end of the day, you don't need this brute force data to come in. And that costs a lot more to have that much data to look at. It costs human capital to have people review it. Reinforcement learning is a different way to do it with less compute, less data, and ends up being less cost. I will end with guardrails. You have to know who you're giving your data to, how we're doing things. We need infrastructure and guardrails, a lot more study. But again, I think we're getting to the point where as we move forward, there's a lot of hope because there's too much data for the human brain to use. We need AI. Digital twins allow us to test on your data, not on you. And that eventually will be an issue for humanity to deal with. And then lastly, we see the advances and they're coming. And so that's promising. We just have to make sure we keep some infrastructure there. I'll end with this. If you did pick your phone out to do any screenshots, please feel free to take a picture of the QR code here. This is our American College of Cardiology AI Resource Center. And all this kind of information we'll put there for you. We'll put actual research there and papers too. But we really try to have small, digestible podcast conversations so that you can learn a lot about all of these fields that need to work together to help us do the good work that we're doing. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Ami. Quick question before we jump into our panel. We both trained at Mass General in medicine and pediatrics. Everyone will soon have, not just DeepSeek, but deep medicine. I think a term coined by Eric Topol, where we might have our own digital twin on our own mobile device. But the challenge is translating that through workflows to the next generation of clinicians, nurses, physicians, to physiatrists and beyond. How do you think about on the cardiology side and even the future of who gets to medical school, how do you train them in med school, residency, and beyond to integrate these into their care paradigms?
Yeah. I think, the idea of adoption, you're really asking about adoption, right? We have early adopters, they'll do everything. Certain fields of medicine are more likely to be early adopters than others because they tend to be more data forward. So radiology, for example, is ahead of others. Some fields of cardiology, like the electrophysiology or arrhythmias, I mentioned, are more ahead of others. But I think it all comes down to actually quick wins. What are the things that are the hardest for us to do? Either hardest in terms of time or money, because money leads to efficiency, get patients in sooner, sure. Time, because there's only so many clinicians and so much time to get work done. But I'll also say a little bit of the joy of medicine or the negative side, the moral injury. Are there places where things like a digital twin can actually help people feel that they're doing a better job for their patient? That's hard to argue with at any level of the system. And so I think those quick wins, what are your, I don't want to just call them pain points, but what are the things that you can target to make better quickly? If you start doing those, you'll get towards digital twin. You're not going to give someone a digital twin off the bat. You're going to say, hey, I have this predictive algorithm. Do you want to start using this calculator? Hey, look, I have the anatomy of that procedure you're doing. Do you want to take a look at what it looks like in virtual reality? And they're learning all these things now. So when you get to the point where we can actually use digital twins, I'm hopeful that everyone would have been exposed to the different components of it. And so putting it all together just made sense to them.
100%. And I think part of the art of the possible with generative AI, or I call it generative health, is these digital twins we'll each have our own that we can interface with, and it'll match our age, culture, language, personality type, healthcare journey, and goals, and really democratize understanding and engagement for everybody, whether you're a patient or a consumer or a human, let alone a clinician. So thanks, Ami. We're going to stick with you on the panel. Teresa, we want you to set up our panel. We'll keep going.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much.
And one of the big things while you did bring everybody up, Ami and I were both in Davos, a lot of talk about, of course, AI, but also agentic health and sort of these personal agents where digital twin is just it's a term. It means different things to different folks. And I'll ask our panelists what they think about when they hear the term digital twin. But the ability to translate the insights and knowledge to the bedside, the website, and to narrow that gap, as we mentioned, from the usual 17 years to 7 minutes, especially as we crowdsource that data and insights and allow people to opt in and be data donors, will help, I think, really democratize access and insights around the planet.
One thing we were talking about just recently is just making sure that people understand when they're working with agentic AI or something that it's not, we're not working with humans, we're working with, right? So in the chatbot form, that's the current form of like the closest thing to something that knows about me. And I was laughing because I actually did say to my mother the other day, she said, how did that call go? I was trying to change a flight or something. I was like, that was actually the nicest chatbot. I used a phrase, nicest chatbot. I anthropomorphized what I knew was a computer as an innovation person, but that was the phrase I used. And so you realize, first of all, user experience is important, but second of all, it's very easy to slip into thinking a computer is human. So we also have to be careful when we teach people, what are you doing? How are you using it? Can you remember? Because if someone like me can call a chatbot nice, we have to be careful there too.
100%. Okay, let's continue on with our panel. Risa, you want to set up?
Okay, absolutely. Just making sure that we've got everyone on here. All right. Well, thank you so much, Daniel and Ami, for setting the stage for our discussion. So the panel today will be on digital twins meet healthcare transformation, really taking a look at in silico today and a look 5 years ahead. So really exciting times. I think I'll just hand it off to you, Daniel, to moderate this panel, and everyone can do self-introductions, and then I'll come back when it's time for Q&A.
Fantastic. All right. Well, we've got an amazing panel. I'm going to let each of them sort of do a short introduction and of themselves, Simon, Rusbe, and Kahal. And I'll start with the question of, what have you already seen being achieved in sort of the digital twin space? Any specific examples you have? Maybe how you even describe what a digital twin is, whether it's in silico technology, et cetera, and how that's having a measurable impact on your work today. And I think we'll start with Simon, go to Rusbe, and then Kahal.
Great. Yeah, it's a great pleasure being here on the panel. So thanks a lot for the invitation. So I'm Simon. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Autonomy. So we're a technology solution provider for virtual patient simulations, the application especially in the medical device industry. Then should I directly go into the question, or should first everyone?
Yeah, you can answer the question too. Like, how are you using it today for Autonomy, and where do you see it going from here?
Great. So yeah, so based on our experience, I can directly give some examples how these digital twins and in silico can be used for the medical device development. And it's not just in the clinical stage, but also throughout the whole development stages. So from concept design over preclinical to the clinical work. And here, one example is recently we worked on a structural heart device where traditional physical types and testing for the design optimization would take months or sometimes even years. So now using digital twins and simulation technology, we simulated the performance of the device across hundreds of virtual patients of the target population then in the app, even before prototyping. This allowed them to iterate the design and then to identify potential issues and optimize the outcomes in a stage where it's still very cost efficient, right? So in this, to really then heavily also reduce the risk to fail in a later stage once you advance to the clinical stage then with your device. And we call this like predictive medical device engineering, so a new kind of engineering tool. But this can also be used for other applications like preclinical. We have one user, Real Heart, it's a Scandinavian company for developer of a total visual heart. And they're using this for the preclinical work of animal testing. And Amy, you mentioned it before, there's a lot of trial and error also here to find the proper size, type of this, and also the implantation strategy. So now by using our database that is also consisting of animal twins, they were able to cut the trial and error and then directly to find the proper animal model with this, to move further way quicker, and then also to reduce the amount of animals. But it can also be used there to transition to humans. This is what they're using this now, to create a device to fit in as many patients as possible. And we are also with one company that transitions now with the device to the Japanese population to also show that the device works for this specific geographic population. That has the size constraints and everything relating to this. Size constraints is another example. The final example I want to go for the clinical stage. It's a provider of an assist device for pediatrics, so for children, and there the chest space is very small, so it's very, very difficult to make the decisions based on what cannula should be used and what implantation protocol there should be used. So they are directly using then the process from imaging to the digital twin to then make a decision what's the best way to use this then. And the outcome is phenomenal. So they say it has helping them so much for the decision making then in the end to make then the operation more safe for the children in the end. So you see, it can be used for a multitude of applications.
Fantastic. And of course, children are not just small adults, and they grow, and sometimes the devices need to blend into that modality. Terrific.
Exactly.
Let's hear from Ruspe Jafari, coming to us from MIT Lincoln Labs, about what he's seeing in silico and beyond.
Sure. So in my view, the digital twin has 5 components. The first component is the actual physical instance. When we are thinking about human health, let's consider a cardiovascular system. The second component is the virtual representation or the model of that physical instance, cardiovascular health. There is a say that all models are wrong, some are useful. The whole point of digital twin is the model has to closely reflect on our cardiovascular system. If I take a generic model from a textbook, this has knowledge, but it's not going to be actionable for my cardiovascular health. So because the model needs to be tightly coupled with the physical instance, the third component is the flow of information from the physical instance to the virtual representation. And that's to use sensors to be able to dynamically update the virtual representation. That's the distinction. A lot of people, when I talk to them, they say, isn't it just a simulation platform? It does have some of those components, but the principal point is that it has to remain tightly coupled with the physical instance. So that's the third component. And the fourth component is the flow of information now from the physical instance back to the virtual representation. And that's what Ami mentioned actually too. My hope is that in a couple of years, when we go see our physicians, the physicians would be able to use our digital twin to figure out if they don't take an action, what would be the trajectory of disorder? How do we look like in a couple of months? And then if they happen to start initiating intervention A or B, how do we look like? And all of these needs to happen behind a computer. And that's really what the digital twin will accommodate. And the last piece of it is the human in the loop. Stakeholders, physicians, and users, and all of these need to come together. And then there is this notion of ethics, security, verification, validation, and uncertainty quantification that will go around all of these.
Fantastic. And just a quick follow-up. How do you think about sharing different models? So what's built at MIT might be different than Stanford or what ACC or Medtronic has built. Do you think there's going to be any kind of platform for interoperability of digital twin modeling?
I think if we have, so again, going back to the initial statement that I made, that all models are wrong, some are useful, right? I think it depends on the fidelity of the model. But if you're thinking about a platform technology, my view is that we will have to start building those models from medical images, from the bottom up. And we have to think about the highest fidelity models. If we need to go to a lower fidelity model, we can always do that. But if you go to a lower fidelity model, we can go back to a higher fidelity model. I think building that from medical imaging is important. There are some interesting challenges when you think about CT scan, MRI, you take an image. There are some of the parameters that you can capture from image but there are many that you can't. You can't capture the stiffness of tissue, for example, from medical image. So there are a whole bunch of really technical, challenging technical problems that need to be addressed, and I'll be happy to talk about it at a later stage.
Now over to Cathal McVeigh from Medtronic. Quick intro and tell us what you see as the state of the art when you're building Medtronic.
Sure. Yeah, happy to. So yeah, my name is Cathal McVeigh. I'm a research director here at Medtronic in our global technology and innovation organization. So my group does a lot of physics-based modeling, more and more data-driven modeling, also kind of augmenting that, some physiology modeling, and a lot of it's really to enable the creation of digital twins, which it's really been dominated around product development to drive device design, starting to get into more in silico clinical evidence and a very keen interest in things like precision medicine, but very much coming at it from somebody with a background in product development and physics-based modeling and trying to extend those types of modelings into digital twins for in silico and precision medicine. I mean, what I'll say around what do I think is a digital twin? It's almost a little bit controversial in medical devices. We've got the formal definition. Rusbe did a really nice job, I think, of distinguishing between what is a model versus what is a digital twin. And I think it really boils down to that kind of dynamic interaction between the two and the information going back and forward. So it's intended to be a kind of living model that is partnered with an actual existing physical. I think you get a little bit more insight into how medical device engineers think if you take a look at the FDA glossary, which talks about what is a digital twin. It uses that formal definition, goes a little bit further, and says, maybe there are applications around things like virtual patient populations for in silico clinical trials, for making personalized healthcare decisions, things like clinical decision support, perhaps. So that's kind of the direction we're looking in. I've definitely seen the models, get much more advanced over the last 20 years. I think you asked for a couple of examples. The ones that come to mind for me are things like our diabetes group, which has developed a whole virtual patient simulator for modeling insulin therapy outcomes for people with type 1 diabetes. So I think people think, okay, virtual patient populations, you're going to do an in silico clinical trial. In that case, that's not what happened. That was used to design the algorithm, optimize the algorithm that lives with the device. It's essentially an artificial pancreas. But you shouldn't understate the importance to medical device companies of having models like that allow you to go into real world clinical trials with a very high degree of confidence that you're going to have a good outcome. That's also really important. I've said that we have used models to replace clinical trials and do in silico clinical trials. We've done that in a neurovascular division where we've created a couple hundred virtual patients with brain aneurysms, and we're able to virtually implant our device in those patients, and we're able to basically demonstrate to regulators that look, we have favorable performance versus real world clinical trials with predicate devices. Therefore, no need to actually essentially replicate one of those clinical trials. And we've done a lot of stuff around fracture and just predicting long-term outcomes in our cardiac division. So I think for me, tons of potential, especially with in silico clinical trials and maybe longer term around personalized medicine.
Of course, thanks. It's also, of course, in silico and now in vitro, and then transitions to device. And then just to punt back over to Ami, any early examples now in that sort of workflow, computer decision support? Cardiology is very device heavy often in the interventional space. What do you see as the sort of early entry to bridging digital twin with what a cardiologist will do in the interventional suite or in the clinic?
Yeah, I'll go back and iterate for a second. I think it's totally right that digital twin needs to incorporate that last part of that consistent data, both kind of input and output, knowing what you're doing. We're doing everything already and have been for a long time in the remote patient monitoring world of getting data in and then trying to interact with it. We have not autonomized that process of data came in and I changed it as often as people would maybe like, but there's also a lot of hesitation about who's following it. Is it right? When do you need to step in? And so there are a lot of models for how do you take data, very, very compact data, and make changes. I think, blood pressure heart failure is complicated. There are a lot more factors to it, but similar to kind of the idea of insulin, where we can have closed loops, that's, I think, where a lot of the research is happening. And it goes from predictive analytics to remote patient monitoring and interaction to somewhat semi-autonomous things with oversight, right, to agentic, which we don't do. And so I think that's kind of the direction we're headed in. So I think that's one thing. What I'll comment and then question. So I think maybe question first is for this team, takes a lot of power, a lot of data, a lot of infrastructure to continually get the information that you want in order to give it back out. Maybe we do it in ICUs throughout the country and in numerous places, right? If we have patients in the ICU, we have so many different monitors, can we consistently get that data? And can we start making adjustments based on it? Still, usually with the human in the loop. But I'm just curious as to about what they see about the opportunity for scale when it requires that much constant data coming in and out to really be a digital twin in that kind of a space. And then I'll just comment, there's a question and answer. There's a nice doctor who actually does a lot of this work in clinical practice, Dr. Jorge Cardona. So he is just advising us that my last slide was probably too simplistic for DeepSeek. So I just want to state that out loud, because I do have scientists who do this for a living on the panel with me. I am the clinician. That was my attempt, and probably not a great one, at making it lay. So for anybody who has feedback on that and how to maybe better express the level of intricacy of where we're going, would love to just open that up to the panel to adjust that. So compute power, consistent follow-up, how do we do that? And then any advice on how to better express where we're going next.
So I'm happy to take on that part and look at it both from the perspective of top-down physicians trying to extract actionable information and bottom-up scientists trying to solve hard problems. I'm going to start with the scientist. The literature is showing that if you take, for example, the reduced model of the heart, that is electrophysiological and mechanical model, it's a multi-scale model. And if you would like to create equivalent of 5 days of heartbeats for future, it takes 500 years of supercomputing power to be able to do this, because these are really complex systems, and it goes in line with what Ami suggested, is that this requires a lot of compute power. I think some of the opportunities there is to be able to figure out what it is that we want from the model, and we would be able to create proxies, some of the AI, some of the physics-informed neural nets, to be able to reduce the computational cost of that. I'm going to look at it also now from the perspective of physicians, and because you mentioned about the blood pressure, by different statistics, hypertension costs United States anything from 150 to $200 billion a year. A large, unfortunately, also adverse events on the number of people. So when we think about hypertension and we measure the blood pressure sensor is there because we figured out how we can measure the pressure, but we don't really need the pressure. Pressure is a proxy for something else, and we need to measure that causation. The blood pressure can go up if you happen to exercise. The blood pressure can also go up if you're stressed out because of the vasoconstriction. So in the end, what we need to measure is the stiffness of artery for most of these instances. And that's where the opportunity comes in, where digital twin can help us. If I happen to have a model, the digital twin can help me to really use my sensors as a proxy to understand the causation. And that's a really hard problem, where in medicine and in many other disciplines, we are good at measuring correlations, but correlations don't really give us what we need to get.
Simon and Kyle, any comments on how you think about that sort of fusion and how you integrate data in, let's say, your next generation device design and translating that to the clinic?
Yeah, I think in general, data is hard to come by. And for various reasons, sometimes when you do have data, you spend most of your time cleaning that data up. So, I mean, very generally, what are some ways to need less data? Can we inject, again, coming from a physics modeling background, can we inject physics governing equations into the data-driven approaches? So we just mentioned there physics-informed neural networks. I think hybrid approaches like that could be the key to solving that problem, or even, there is a ready source of data, synthetic data, again, from physics-based modeling that could potentially help to solve that data challenge.
And I would say when you really want to have like a full in silico clinical trial where a very diverse population is included when it comes to geography, pathology, age also, maybe pediatric patients and so on. So you need quite a lot of data. And what is still there, there's not real guidelines or access to data. For example, recently I switched my dentist from one to the other, and they were not able to transfer the X-ray scan from one dentist to the other. So I had to do the scan again. So this is just very basic, but it shows that it's not accessible. So what we have done, we have created a very good network of hospitals, of partnerships with data sources to really create this database then of covering the diversity of populations. And I think this is very necessary in the end to have. And synthesizing is possible, but you can only synthesize data when you have enough ground data there to then synthesize it later on.
And now we have these new forms of data, sometimes continuous. Your wearable devices can soon do real-time blood pressure, maybe blood sugar, and you'll have everyone's sleep data. So what can inform these models is becoming real-time and anywhere, anytime at very low cost, not just the fancy MRI-based, anatomical and molecular elements. So in the last maybe 10 minutes, and we can go around the horn and jump around, let's futurescape a little bit, right? We're sort of still in the early innings of this sort of digital twin era. If you look 5 or even 10 years ahead, I'd be curious as to sort of where you see the digital twin in silico transforming healthcare and what kind of partnerships and innovations are going to be needed to really converge and accelerate real impact. Who wants to jump in?
I can jump in. I mean, I think you'll see traditional medical device companies just becoming more digital savvy, more software aware in future, move from a position of selling devices to having more focus on the whole digital ecosystem around those devices. Digital twins, the current state is fairly rosy around product development. They're used to optimize devices, but we use digital twins these days to optimize a device to work in as many patients as possible. I think in future that'll still happen, but maybe a supercharged version of those digital twins will then be redeployed later in the process when you go to use those devices in individual patients to really tailor how that optimized device is used to treat each individual patient. I think that'll be catalyzed by things like robotically assisted surgery, even transcatheter, robotically assisted transcatheter procedures. The future is probably going to be robotics heavier than it is today. I think in that scenario, you're going to need real-time predictions of how, the robots, the surgical tools, flexible catheters, medical devices, and deformable anatomy, they're all interacting with each other to, A, plan the procedure, and B, when inevitably the plan doesn't go to plan, to, update the plan on the fly during the procedure. So you're going to have these super fast responsive digital twins of individual patients. So huge potential, I think, around precision medicine applications in general, especially if there's that trend toward robotic interventions. And that's all very complex. I think just plotting the regulatory path of those kind of hybrid, kind of multifaceted medical devices, it just needs close cooperation with regulators.
And maybe even reinventing the regulatory process to some degree, and even thinking about digital manufacturing, 3D printing those devices for that patient in the OR just in time might even be part of that.
Yeah.
It's going to enable convergence.
The applications are catching up with the vision of what we described as a digital twin earlier. Those types of applications are coming, and it feels like we may need to start patching together different regulatory pathways for those devices unless we can figure out what that pathway should look like for a digital twin.
Ami, you wanted to comment?
Yeah, I think it's really promising. I look forward to the day, and I think the pharma companies can do it with the data that we have, where you can tell me which the best next med for me is. And I think that's out there. I think in the product side, in terms of devices, we're going to be able to have loops where we can understand what's happening, fix it. And as you said, we 3D print a week before at Master Emerald to kind of look at things and will this valve fit, et cetera, but real time. I do want to just take a big step back because we often do this in innovation. We're very futuristic and here's what's possible. And then look at what does healthcare mean today? and how the majority of healthcare is happening in areas that don't have access, that don't even have a clinic, that have no physician. And so I just want to go back to say, I think we all recognize that there is a need for equitable healthcare in the communities where people need it the most. And so maybe I'll use this as a plug. The only way we're going to get this kind of stuff there is public-private partnerships. I think government infrastructure regulations is fine. I don't know that government dollars are going to make it there. And so I think those public-private partnerships that have helped us do Cancer Moonshot and other things, if they see the promise and if we can explain nicely how much better it is to be able to treat people like an individual and not treat them as a group, because in general, we're really not treating anybody well when we do that, maybe a very small sliver of the population. And I think those public-private partnerships may actually lead to us being able to use these kind of technologies in the communities that need it the most. And that's where we're going to make a difference in kind of healthcare for humanity. So that's my plug for the day. The last thing I'll say is, it's funny, I started my research in 2008 doing arterial measurements, similar to what Rizbe was talking about. Blood pressure as a number is not great. There are much better ways to know what's happening inside. And so the scientist and the way inside of me is like, hey, we could actually use better parameters to measure health in 10 years than the things that we have been using. So I think from a science side, that's actually really exciting as well. I'm going to go off camera for a little bit. So I just wanted to say thank you so much to everybody, and I'll just be here in the background.
Thanks so much, Ami. Simon, what's your sort of 5-year view for autonomy and beyond, and what's needed? What could you ask this community for to help accelerate that?
Yeah, actually, once I have a memory of once I asked a friend, befriend a clinician, what they really would wish for, and he told me a time machine. And I asked, yeah, why a time machine? And he said, so to travel in the future to see the outcome of a treatment and then travel back and to adjust the decision accordingly. So I think what we cannot do is to create a time machine. We have a very good team, but I think this is something out of hand. But digital twins could be something to really do this. And I think it was mentioned here, Kahal, you also mentioned that goes in the direction of precision medicine. So when every person could have their own digital twin that doctors can use to really make a decision what treatment, what drug, what device, what size, and so on should be used of this. And this is something we can get there with the technology advancing forward, with the data getting there, and also the computer power. And regulatory is something that I also see very important included here, and not just one regulatory side like the FDA, but really on a global space. There must be also the collaboration of harmonizing this to really make it safe and applicable worldwide for all different kinds of usage. And this can then also lead to the real full in silico clinical trials, and you have all these digital twins of the personalized people, and then apply this really then for the whole population.
100%. Rizbe or Kahal, any last comments, and we'll bring it to a close.
Sure. So I think there is the literature actually is reporting that in cardiovascular health, 30 to 70% of medication is either minimally effective or not effective at all. And I think digital twin can really address some of those issues. The physician should not have to guess. They should be able to really initiate the intervention based on hard facts coming from these simulation models. There was a comment about the big data versus the small data. My view on this about the digital twin is the premise of digital twin is all about the small data. I have to start with my data and build up the models bottom up. But then there is an early stage R&D that needs to go into this. When you look at the sort of the evolution of AI, we started with images and vision. And the reason is because cameras are everywhere and individuals can start building these techniques. And then we went into LLM because text is everywhere. So I think there is a little bit of effort that is required to make some of the repositories and some of the data available and get the know-how. Digital twins are end-to-end. You can't just build one part of it and you would expect the entire system to work. So from images, functionalizing the images, parameter extraction, simulation, we need to have some of those know-hows. I think with that, we're going to be able to really accelerate the R&D in this field.
Especially because, it can't just be a cardiovascular twin or a brain twin or a endocrine twin. It's got to be all synthesized because we're all holistic beings and healthcare systems. Any last
So,
comments from Colin?
Daniel, since you mentioned that, I'm going to make a quick comment about it too, because we have the notion of digital twin in aerospace. We have the notion of digital twin in construction sciences. Every building has its own model. One of the reasons that those fields have had a quicker progress is because you can always start with a simple airplane, simple building, and build your way up. But the problem is you can't start with a simple human. And that's exactly goes in line with what you just said.
All right, great note to end on. What an incredible panel discussion, truly illuminating. Perhaps the participants can join me in a round of applause for, for the group. Thank you so much to each of you, Dr. Daniel Kraft, Dr. Simon Sontag, Dr. Ruzbeh Jafari, Dr. Ami Bhatt, and Dr. Cahill McVeigh. Really appreciate you sharing your time and expertise. This was a great inaugural Digital.Health Studio series. We want to thank all of you who have joined us, and look out for future episodes as we continue to work to build visibility of these incredible technologies and accelerate adoption to truly usher in this new era of health. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.